Well, hello there, my name is HW, and thank you so much for watching Tone Junkie TV. You know, one of the most common questions I've been getting lately is, HW, how do you, what adjustments would you suggest I make, you know, to make my profile sound brighter or darker or this or that? And there's a real learning curve to the Kemper because there are different options to sort of augment the sound, to adjust the EQ. You know, with a traditional tube amplifier, we're really limited to just the EQ controls we have, or maybe to an input on the outside, but usually that's just raising and lowering, you know, sort of the gain level, or just putting a pad on the input. The Kemper gives us all sorts of controls. Now, nothing that I'm going to say in this video hasn't been already covered in previous videos, but I realize I've done many different videos on different controls on the Kemper, but never really approached it in letting you guys know how I view the Kemper and what I think is the sort of the best way to approach dialing in your profiles. How do you dial in your sound? So I've got today a Sir Strat here. This is a custom classic, and this guitar is pretty much just like the classic pros that you would buy today. So and this is a good guitar to use because it has singles and a humbucker. Now this guitar is voiced really well, but I think you're going to be able to hear what kind of what I'm talking about. Right there in the intro, I was playing the Silver Jubilee R2 profile. That's from the Silver Jube pack. Oops, I probably shouldn't spell it out there on the profile. Oh well. But anyway, that's what I've named it in here. And so this is the Silver Jube R2 from Tone Junkie. But what you heard there in the intro was a little bit of humbucker and a little bit of single coil sound. So I'm going to tell you the 3 steps that I use to dial in profiles. But first, let's listen to this profile and talk about it for a minute. Love it. I love this profile. I really do. It's not very broken up. In fact, this is really my preferred gain range because I love being able to take a Stratocaster like this and just clean it up a bit. It's just a little bit broken, and then with a humbucker, I love that sound. But let's call a spade here. It's a little mid-rangey. It's not the most present in the high end. It's actually a bit, it's got that Marshall mid-range thing going on. And to me, that gives it a really nice voice for these single coils. But let's say we want to brighten it up a little bit. Here's the 3 stages that I sort of look at. Steps 1, 2, and 3 for dialing in your profiles. First, I'm always going to start with the definition control. Let's go into amplifier here, and I'm always going to start right here. Now, really quick, I've covered a bunch of parameters in the Kemper, including this definition control, but this definition control is where I'm going to get 80% of the way there. So let's say I want something a little bit darker, right? Maybe that's too bright. I can actually back off the definition control, and what it's going to do is interesting. It's going to darken it up a little bit, but it's also, it can start subtracting sort of some middle and bass here. As we get it way high, and then it can really subtract some high end as we get it really low. I've talked to people about what we think this does, how it operates. Kemper has described it as the components in the amplifier getting bigger or smaller. Michael Britt and I have had some discussions. He brought up that, you know, it might have something to do with dumping some bass. You know, that's common in amplifier circuits to actually cut low end before a gain stage. There could be some of that going on. But let's check this out. At low settings, here's what I can make this amplifier sound like. Woolly, dark. I can bring it here up to 5, and we're going to have still a pretty usable setting, I think. Really nice. Now, I'm going to be able to also throw that on a brighter position, like the bridge. Now, to me, that sounds like a bright guitar into an amp, but it's not overly bright. It's actually quite rounded off in the high end. It's pretty sort of muffled in the low end. Now, what happens if I keep increasing this control right here? Well, let's get it up here about 7.5, which is sort of around where I had it. And you're going to notice more high end. Do you hear how we really haven't touched a ton of mid-range content? We've sort of been leaving the mid-range alone. There's still a honkiness, there's still a very martial quality to this control. But I am able to sort of add in a sort of definition on the note. Now, it's our tendency to want to go, isn't that just treble? Aren't you just darkening it and brightening it? It's a little bit different than that. It's controlling multiple sort of parameters. So listen to the bass. It's kind of controlling. You can sort of hear the difference in the defined character of that bass. It's the same kind of thing as if you have a lot of high end on your bass, you can hear the attack of the bass, even though those frequencies that are being covered are really low, you know, below 100 hertz, down to 50 hertz and stuff, even lower than that really for a really nice thick bass. I'm always going to dial this in to where it sounds good to me here. So step 1, definition control. Now I'm going to want it a little bit more defined than that because I want to bring this up to where my bridge humbucker is still pretty bright and cutting. That's just personal preference, and that's for me because I like to be able to throw a tube screamer on. And I just like to be able to do that and still have a really like cutting characteristic to it. But back at the single coil. A little bit on the bright side, but that's sort of my preference. I do enjoy a little bit of a brighter sound like that because it cuts through live a little bit better. Now, once I've done this, I'm going to just put this back where I had it at 8.6. So it's perfect. There are other parameters in here. I'm not going to cover those right now. I've covered those in other videos. Clarity, compressor, power sag. I'm always adjusting those, but play around with those. Step 2 for dialing, how I like to dial in profiles. I like to do step 1, most of the work gets done with the definition control. Step 2, this is where I'm going to come and I'm going to do some work right here in the EQ. Oops, I dropped my pick there. Good thing I have another. So here's that sound again. Now, what happens if I want to add some high end, some brightness? You might be thinking, HW, you don't need that. I don't think I need it either, but one of the things I love about this EQ, one of the things I love about the Kemper is this EQ does not get praised enough. It is one of the most musical EQs. You really can move these all around, and it still sounds very musical and very good. I've talked on the Tone Junkie podcast a bit about this, but however, whatever frequencies these are dialed into with whatever bandwidth, whatever kind of cue is being used, they're really nice. I mean, they control frequencies and I never feel like I'm getting a harsh ugliness out of it. I mean, maybe at extreme settings with certain profiles, but they're very forgiving if you ask me, and it gives you a lot of flexibility. So I brighten this up a bit. Now you're going to notice that high end is a little bit different than when I just increased the definition control. Here's it back to normal. And here's me adding a bit of presence and a bit of treble. I'm going to about less than 1 on each of them. I'm going to about 0.7 or 0.8 on each of these controls. It's also going to make my in-between position sound pretty bright. I mean, sounds good to me. What happens though? Let's try this. Let's say that's too much. Maybe I want that level of brightness, but I don't have enough mid-range. Check this out on the bridge. Maybe I want to push a little more. Let's be aggressive and let's push that up to 2.4. Now, a lot of people are going, oh, I don't know, that seems like a big jump. Isn't it destroying the sound of the profile? It sounds like a little mid-push on the same sound. Let me take that back down to 0. Now let's push it back up to about 2.4 again. Wow, I like that. I really do. And I bet I'm gonna like it on the single coils as well. To me, that push in the mid-range gives a Strat that sort of pushed, juicy quality that I really like in a Strat. I went for the bar there, and there's no bar on this guitar. I really like pushing the mid-range like this, especially on like a Marshall like this. I think pushing the mid-range here really gives it a very juicy, Marshall-y kind of characteristic. Now, there we go, step 2. I'm gonna say I like where my brightness is with the definition control. I like it even more now that I've been able to add some mid-range. I don't think I need to cut any bass really. Yeah, to me, I don't really need to. I mean, you could add some in, just to show you kind of how musical the bass is. I mean, to me, it's a very, very usable control. Again, I really don't subscribe to the whole, you're destroying the profile, the integrity of the sound if you use this thing. To me, it's just like, this is like an EQ that could mimic, a change in a microphone preamp or a change that would take place in post. They could put an EQ on your guitar. I mean, that happens all the time. So to me, one of the beauties of the Kemper is you can dial in your sound to sound like it did on the record, or sound like you want the record to sound, like you want a live guitar to sound. You don't have to sort of be like, well, after the speaker, I have no more control, and it's up to the front of house engineer to go mic, preamp, and EQ and stuff. You have all that control in the Kemper. That's one of the things I love about this EQ right here. Now, yes, there's a graphic EQ here. I could turn this on. I can't remember what my default is right there, but it sounds like this. To me, that sounds like the rhythm mix EQ that's in the Kemper, but I could be wrong about that. But there are other EQs you can add here. One of the great things about the Kemper, you can add an EQ after the fact. Now, one thing I will point out too, you do get the option to do pre and post EQ here. I like to do a post EQ after the amplifier section. That's a little bit more traditional. If you set it to pre, you're going to be affecting basically the pickups in the guitar more, the signal that goes into the amp before the profile sort of does its thing in the amp section. Step 1, definition control. Step 2, amp EQ. Step 3, and this is a really fine sort of point. This is for the real fine tuning stuff. Go into the cabinet section, and you've got these high and low high and low shift. Now, here's what that does. You can actually take the high information, the high frequencies in a Kemper profile, and not just raise and lower them in gain, in volume, which is what normally you can do with different frequencies on an EQ. When you boost a certain frequency or cut a frequency, you're boosting or you're taking away from that frequency. So you're controlling volume. What this actually allows you to do is grab that whole band of frequencies, grab the high frequencies and sort of shift them lower. So all that information, all those peaks and valleys that were here, the Kemper just sort of is like, well, what if I just shifted all that information lower in the frequency spectrum? And it does the same thing with bass and with treble. Here's why that's important. One, that's a super cool control. I don't know of an EQ that does that in real life. But What it allows you to do is really simulate amps getting bigger or smaller, 112s, 412s, that sort of thing. Because this low shift allows you to actually take the lowest content, the lowest information that's in a profile, the lowest frequencies, and smear them lower. So if you want to get even lower bass, check this out. Let's shift that low end down. So we're actually shifting low end into lower frequencies. I can hear that in my room. If you're on a phone or something, you're probably gonna not really get this. It's actually taking those lows and moving them pretty low. Now, this profile is already a 212 cabinet through a Marshall. Let's shift these lows way up high. We're gonna be playing the smallest Marshall in the world now. Isn't that ridiculous? Okay, that's a ridiculous setting. I mean, it's taking all the lows and shifting them way up high, but it's to show you how powerful this thing is. You really don't need such an extreme setting. I usually never go past 0.4 or 0.5. It's pretty powerful when you do. So let me show you that back at 0 again. I'm going to shift those lows up to plus 0.4. I can hear that in the room. If you can't hear it on a phone or something, let me shift this up even higher to 0.7, 0.8. We're really starting to cut into the low end, 1.3. It's starting to sound like a bridge pickup, but I'm on the neck. Let's go down to the bridge. It's starting to just be a shallow bass when I get to like 0.2, 0.23. So I'm really not sure if at some level it doesn't, kick in right away. It doesn't feel the most responsive at some of the low settings, but sometimes it makes a little difference. If you have a small amp, you can add in some, you can sort of shift the low end lower that way, if that makes sense. But with a full profile already, you might have to make some larger adjustments to really get it noticed, because it's debatable whether it could be cutting frequencies that you're not hearing through your speaker, which is probably happening if you're on a phone. But if you have headphones, cans, or like speaker monitors like these, you're going to be able to hear the difference there in the low end. Now let's do the same thing with the high shift. Back to 0. Let's go to that bridge and let's cut some of this high. Let's shift it lower. I keep saying cut, but we got to think of it as shifting it lower. Back to 0 again, or 0-ish. Hey, sounding good. You can see what we can do there. Now let's add a bunch of high end. If I was going to try to simulate a bright switch on an amp, this is exactly how I would do it. I would come in here, I'd shift these highs up high, and I'd go with something like this. And I'm on a Marshall, but let's say we had a bright switch, like a Fender or something like this. Now I'm going to put that back to 0, and you're going to hear sort of the normal Marshall sound. A little faux bright switch, bring it up to like 1.6. That little trick will work on anything you find, anywhere. Michael Britt, Tone Junkie, anybody, the Stu G collection stuff. I mean, Selah Sounds, whoever you're playing, Sin Mix reamps. I'm not sure how many like, metal amps you'd want a bright switch for, but you know what I'm saying. Any profiles found on the Rig Exchange, you could be like, hey, what's a little bright switch going to sound like? And that would be like a good way to simulate a bright switch. Largely, I'm leaving these alone, but sometimes I have a little bit of a smaller amp that I really like the sound of, and I tend to shift the lows down a little bit. Sometimes I like to shift the highs up a little bit to give me just a little bit more presence, a little bit more sparkle, and it does it in a slightly different way than the other controls do. That's how I do it, guys. That's how I kind of approach the Kemper, and I think in general it's a pretty logical way to do it. Definition control, largely in the community, myself, a lot of people on the boards, and just a bunch of Kemper players, it's kind of a general consensus. The definition control is super powerful, so start there. I think that's pretty typical advice that you hear from Kemper owners. For me, next I would say go ahead and go to the EQ. This is where sometimes for rock and roll stuff, I like to boost some mid-range. Now that's a little aggressive for this sound. Maybe I'd go to a sound of something else, or maybe I'd turn on a boost of a tube screamer. I don't know. You could do it a lot of ways, but I also do like to add a little treble and presence when I play live. In here, it sounds bright enough. I'm going through a Friedman ASM 12 right now. Sometimes I go through the Gemini cab, which is just right there off screen. A lot of times I go through these Yamaha monitors. In here, I tend not to need the little treble and presence adjustments up, but live I really like it because I feel like cutting a little bit of bass and having those treble and presence up just lets my guitar sit a little more friendly in the mix and not get hung up in some of the lower frequencies. After the EQ, I sometimes make adjustments to the cabinet, the high and low shift. To me, that's the 1, the 2, and the 3. I'm trying not to drop my pick as I show you 3. 1, 2, and 3 of dialing in profiles. I hope you guys thought that was helpful, and I hope that shed some light on how I do it. And hopefully that helps you in your Kemper journey. It's such an amazing product, it really is, and really do love this thing. All right, HW, out.